The ink was still wet on the divorce papers when I signed my name for the final time. Catherine Evans, single woman. The title felt foreign on my tongue, like trying on clothes that didn't quite fit. 42 years old and starting over. Damn. That's it, Mrs. Evans, my lawyer said, sliding the documents across the mahogany desk. You're officially free. Free. The word should have felt liberating, but instead it sat heavy in my chest like a stone. I stared at my signature. Bold, decisive strokes that ended 15 years of marriage to Charles. 15 years of pretending everything was fine, while slowly suffocating behind white picket fences and dinner parties where I smiled until my face hurt. The drive home to Stockton took forever. Every familiar landmark reminded me of the life I was leaving behind. The grocery store where Charles and I had our first fight about organic vegetables. The park where we'd walked Max when he was just a puppy. Even the damn gas station held memories I didn't want anymore. My house looked smaller somehow when I pulled into the driveway. The windows stared back at me like accusatory eyes. Inside, Max greeted me with his usual enthusiasm, golden tail wagging as if nothing had changed. If only it were that simple. I found myself in the living room, staring at our wedding photos on the mantel. There we were, young and hopeful, thinking we had it all figured out. Charles looked handsome in his tuxedo, and I looked radiant in white lace that cost more than my car. What a joke. I started pulling frames down one by one, wrapping them in newspaper like I was burying the dead. We had some good times, didn't we, boy? I asked Max, who tilted his golden head at me with those knowing brown eyes. But good isn't enough anymore. The boxes piled up on the coffee table. Wedding gifts, anniversary presents, vacation souvenirs from trips where we barely spoke to each other. Evidence of a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt hollow within. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay in bed listening to the house settle around me, every creak and groan amplified in the silence. Tomorrow I'd have to face the world as a newly divorced woman, pretend I had my act together, while everything inside felt scattered like puzzle pieces. Morning came too soon. The animal clinic felt different somehow when I walked through the doors. Maybe it was me who was different. My staff greeted me with careful smiles. Word travels fast in a small town, and my divorce wasn't exactly a secret anymore. Dr. Evans, we have a new patient in room 3, Sarah, my assistant, said gently. Rescue cat. Pretty traumatized. Perfect. Just what I needed. Another broken soul to fix when I couldn't even fix myself. But animals were simpler than humans. Their pain was honest, uncomplicated by years of lies and disappointment. The orange tabby cowered in the corner of his carrier, green eyes wide with fear. His fur was matted, and I could see the outline of his ribs through his coat. Someone had hurt this little guy, and now he didn't trust anyone. Hey there, buddy, I whispered, slowly extending my hand. I know exactly how you feel. 2 weeks later, I was staring at a cruise brochure like it held the secrets to the universe. Alaska. 7 days of nothing but ocean and sky, far away from everything that reminded me of my failed marriage. The idea hit me during lunch break while scrolling through travel websites, a desperate attempt to outrun the suffocating weight of my empty house. You're really going to do this? Sarah asked, peering over my shoulder at the glossy images of glaciers and whales. Alone? Why not? I've spent the last 15 years doing everything with someone else. Maybe it's time I figured out who I am by myself. The booking process felt surreal. One person, interior cabin, departing next Friday. My finger hovered over the confirm button for a solid minute before I clicked it. There, done, no turning back now. I called in sick for the rest of the week, something I'd never done in my entire career. Max looked confused as I pulled out my dusty suitcase and started throwing clothes into it. Sundresses I'd never worn, hiking boots that still had tags on them, a swimsuit that made me feel exposed and vulnerable. The drive to the port in Seattle felt like an escape route. Every mile between me and Stockton loosened something in my chest. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling like I was drowning. Meanwhile, 300 miles away, Mia Mitchell was having her own crisis. She stood in her small apartment, staring at the same cruise brochure I'd been obsessing over. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her blue eyes were rimmed with exhaustion from another double shift at the care facility. You need this, Mia, she told her reflection in the bathroom mirror. When's the last time you did something just for yourself? The answer was never. At 38, she'd spent her entire adult life taking care of other people. First her aging parents, then her elderly patients, always putting everyone else's needs before her own. The cruise was an impulse purchase made at 3 in the morning after a particularly brutal shift with Mrs. Henderson, who'd spent 6 hours screaming about imaginary intruders. Her brother Harold had called that morning, his voice dripping with disapproval. "A cruise? Alone? What will people think, Mia? You should be focusing on finding a husband, not gallivanting around the ocean like some desperate spinster." She'd hung up on him. Another first. The ship was massive, a floating city that made both of us feel small and anonymous. Perfect. I found my cabin on deck 7, barely big enough for one person but clean and functional. Through the tiny porthole, I could see other passengers boarding. Families with screaming kids, elderly couples holding hands, groups of friends already planning their adventures. I felt completely alone and strangely liberated by it. Mia's cabin was 2 decks below mine, equally cramped but somehow comforting in its simplicity. She unpacked methodically, hanging up the few nice outfits she owned, and placing her books on the narrow shelf. Romance novels, mostly, guilty pleasures she'd never admit to reading. The ship's horn blasted as we pulled away from Seattle, and I found myself on deck watching the city shrink behind us. The Pacific stretched endlessly ahead, dark blue and promising. Other passengers chatted excitedly around me, but I preferred the solitude. That's when I noticed her for the first time, a blonde woman standing at the opposite rail, also alone, also watching the horizon with an expression I recognized. Loss, hope, the desperate need for something different. She was beautiful in an understated way, her blue eyes reflecting the ocean's color. There was something about the set of her shoulders that spoke of strength earned through hardship. She caught me staring and offered a small smile before looking away. I should have introduced myself then. Should have walked over and said hello like a normal person. Instead, I retreated to my cabin and ordered room service, telling myself I was here to be alone, to figure out my life without complications. But as the ship rocked gently beneath me that first night, I couldn't stop thinking about those blue eyes and wondering what story they held. The second night on the ship, I found myself drawn to the upper deck like a moth to flame. The cruise director had announced a stargazing activity, and something about the promise of infinite darkness above appealed to me. Maybe the stars could offer answers that dry land couldn't. I wrapped my jacket tighter against the ocean breeze and made my way to the designated area. A few telescopes were set up along the deck, and maybe a dozen other passengers had gathered, their faces tilted toward the vast canopy above. The ship's lights had been dimmed, and for the first time in years, I could actually see the Milky Way stretching across the sky like spilled sugar. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a familiar voice said beside me. I turned and there she was, the blonde woman from the rail yesterday. Up close she was even more striking. Her hair caught the starlight, and those blue eyes seemed to hold depths I wanted to explore. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, nothing fancy, but she carried herself with quiet confidence. "It is," I managed, suddenly aware of how long it had been since I'd had a real conversation with another woman. "I'm Catherine. Mia." Her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes in a way that made my chest flutter unexpectedly. "I saw you yesterday at the rail. You looked like you were searching for something." "Maybe I was. Still am, I guess." The honesty surprised me. "What about you? What brings you to the middle of the ocean?" She was quiet for a moment, considering. "Escape, mostly. Sometimes you need to get far enough away from your life to see it clearly." I understood that completely. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. The ship's movement was barely perceptible, just a gentle rocking that made the whole world feel suspended between sea and sky. "Would you like to share a telescope?" Mia asked, gesturing toward one of the instruments that had just been vacated. "I don't know much about astronomy, but I'm willing to learn." We took turns peering through the eyepiece, Mia's shoulder brushing against mine as we adjusted the focus. She smelled like vanilla and something floral, subtle, not overpowering like the perfumes Charles used to buy me. When she leaned in to look at Saturn's rings, her hair tickled my cheek, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Interest, real, genuine attraction to another human being. "It's incredible," she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. "All those rings so perfect and organized, makes you wonder what else is out there we can't see." "The guide said we might spot some whales tomorrow," I offered, trying to keep the conversation neutral even as my pulse quickened. Apparently they migrate through these waters this time of year. "I've never seen a whale in person. That would be amazing." We talked for another hour, sharing stories about our work. Her caring for elderly patients, me treating traumatized animals. There was something about the darkness and the vast ocean that made confession easier. I found myself telling her about my divorce, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. 15 years, I said, gripping the deck rail. 15 years of pretending to be someone I wasn't, trying to fit into a life that never quite felt right. Mia nodded knowingly. I understand that feeling. Sometimes the life everyone expects you to live isn't the one you're meant for. What about you? Ever been married? She shook her head, a shadow crossing her face. Came close once. But I realized I was more in love with the idea of being in love than with the actual person. Seemed unfair to both of us. The honesty between us felt dangerous and thrilling. Here was a woman who understood the weight of living up to other people's expectations, the exhaustion of wearing masks that never quite fit. I should probably head back, Mia said eventually, though she made no move to leave. Early excursion tomorrow. Me too. But neither of us moved. The stars continued their ancient dance above us, and I felt something shifting inside my chest. Not the desperate loneliness I'd been carrying since the divorce, but something warmer, possibility. Catherine? Mia's voice was soft in the darkness. Yeah? I'm glad we met. Me too. She squeezed my hand briefly before walking away, leaving me alone with the stars, and a feeling I couldn't quite name. As I watched her disappear through the deck doors, I realized I was already looking forward to seeing her again tomorrow. For the first time in months, I fell asleep easily, lulled by the ocean's rhythm and the memory of blue eyes that seemed to see straight through me. The next morning, I found myself scanning the breakfast buffet like a teenager looking for her crush. Pathetic, really, but I couldn't help it. When I spotted Mia at a corner table with coffee and toast, my heart did this ridiculous little skip. Mind if I join you? I asked, balancing my plate of scrambled eggs and fruit. Please do. Her smile was warm, genuine. I was hoping I'd see you. We fell into easy conversation over coffee, discovering we both preferred our eggs over easy and our coffee black. Small things, but they felt significant somehow. She told me about her job at the care facility, how she'd gotten into elderly care after watching her grandmother struggle with dementia. It's heartbreaking work sometimes, she said, stirring sugar into her second cup. But there are moments of real connection that make it worthwhile, like when Mrs. Patterson remembers my name, or when Mr. Rodriguez tells me stories about his late wife. I understand that. Animals can't tell you their stories, but you learn to read their pain anyway. Sometimes I think they're more honest than people about what they need. Maybe that's why we're both here, Mia said quietly, taking care of everyone else except ourselves. The observation hit closer to home than I cared to admit. We finished breakfast and discovered we'd both signed up for the same shore excursion in Juneau, a hiking tour through the Mendenhall Glacier area. Coincidence or fate? I wasn't sure which. The bus ride to the glacier was filled with chattering tourists and scenic views, but I found myself more interested in watching Mia react to the landscape. Her eyes lit up at every mountain peak, every glimpse of wildlife. There was something infectious about her wonder, like she was seeing the world for the first time. Look at that, she breathed, pointing to a bald eagle circling overhead. I've never seen one in the wild before. The hiking trail was moderate, winding through dense forest before opening onto spectacular views of the glacier. We walked side by side, our conversation flowing as naturally as the streams we crossed. She told me about growing up in a small town, how she'd always felt different but couldn't quite put her finger on why. My brother Harold thinks I'm too picky, she said, stepping carefully over a fallen log. Says I'll end up alone if I don't settle down soon, but settling feels like giving up, you know? I settled, I admitted. 15 years of settling for someone who was perfectly fine on paper but never made my heart race. Never made me feel like I was fully alive. We stopped at an overlook where the glacier stretched out before us like a frozen river, blue-white and ancient. The silence between us was comfortable, charged with something I was afraid to name. Catherine, Mia said softly, turning to face me. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever wonder if you've been looking for love in all the wrong places? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility. I looked into her blue eyes and saw my own confusion reflected there, my own desperate hope for something real. Every day, I whispered. That's when she leaned in and kissed me. Soft, tentative, like she was asking a question with her lips. I answered by kissing her back, my hands finding her face, her hair. She tasted like coffee and possibility, and for the first time in years, everything felt right. We broke apart, both breathing hard, staring at each other in wonder and terror. "I'm sorry," she started, but I cut her off. "Don't be sorry. Please don't be sorry. I've thought about it, but I've never actually—" "Me neither." The admission felt like jumping off a cliff. "But I want to. With you." The hike back to the bus was different. We walked closer together, our hands brushing occasionally, sending little shocks through my system. Other tourists chattered around us, but we existed in our own bubble of newfound awareness. That evening, the ship hosted a social dance in the main ballroom. I almost didn't go, but the thought of seeing Mia again drew me like gravity. She was there in a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, looking nervous and beautiful. "Dance with me?" I asked, extending my hand. "I should warn you, I'm terrible at this." "So am I." We swayed together to some generic cruise ship band playing old standards, and it didn't matter that we stepped on each other's feet or that other passengers might be watching. All that mattered was the feeling of her in my arms, the way she fit against me like she belonged there. "This is crazy," she murmured against my ear. The best things usually are. When the song ended, we didn't separate immediately. We stood there on the dance floor holding each other, both of us knowing that something fundamental had shifted. The careful walls we'd built around our hearts were crumbling, and for once, I wasn't afraid of what might come next. The next morning brought rough seas and an unwelcome interruption. I was having coffee with Mia on the deck when her phone rang, the harsh sound cutting through our quiet conversation like a knife. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. "It's my brother," she said apologetically. "I should take this." I watched her walk a few steps away, but the wind carried Harold's voice back to me anyway. Even from a distance, I could hear the panic in his tone, the way he barked orders at Mia like she was still a child. "What do you mean you're on a cruise? Mia, you need to come home right now. Mrs. Patterson's family is threatening to sue the facility, and they're asking specifically for you. This could ruin everything we've worked for." Mia's shoulders tensed. "Harold, I'm in the middle of the ocean. I can't exactly catch a cab home." "Don't get smart with me. This is serious. You have responsibilities here, obligations to the family business. I never should have let you take this ridiculous vacation." I felt my protective instincts flare. Who was this man to talk to her like that? Mia was 38 years old, not some teenager who needed permission to live her life. "I'll be back in 4 days as scheduled," Mia said firmly. "Whatever crisis you think is happening can wait." "Crisis I think is happening?" Harold's voice rose to a near shout. "Mia, when are you going to grow up and take some responsibility? You're not getting any younger, and this flighty behavior isn't helping anyone. Maybe if you settled down with a nice man instead of running around the world like some lost soul, you'd have better priorities." That's when I saw something shift in Mia's expression. Desperation, maybe, or just pure exhaustion from years of this kind of manipulation. She looked back at me, then at the ocean, then made a decision that would change everything. "Actually, Harold, I have some news. I'm engaged." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I nearly choked on my coffee. "Engaged?" Harold's voice was strangled. "To whom?" "You haven't mentioned anyone." "Her name is Catherine. We met on the cruise, but we've been corresponding for months. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure." My heart hammered against my ribs. What was she doing? "Catherine," Harold repeated slowly. "Catherine what?" "Evans. She's a veterinarian. Very successful, very stable. Everything you're always telling me I need." I stood frozen, watching this woman I barely knew spin an elaborate lie that somehow included me as her fiancé. The rational part of my brain screamed that this was insane, but another part, a part I'd been ignoring for too long, felt a thrill at being claimed by her, even fictitiously. "I want to meet her," Harold said suspiciously. "When you get back, I want to meet this Catherine Evans." "Of course. She's actually from Stockton, too. Small world, right?" Mia ended the call and turned to face me, her blue eyes wide with panic, and something that might have been hope. "I can explain," she started. "You told your brother we're engaged." The words came out flat, emotionless, while my brain tried to process what had just happened. "I know how it sounds. I know it's crazy. But you don't understand what he's like, Catherine. He's been trying to control my life since our parents died. Every decision I make has to go through him. Every relationship gets his approval or disapproval. I'm so tired of it. So you decided to make me your fake fiancé without asking? She flinched at the anger in my voice. I panicked. He was going on about settling down and finding a husband, and the words came out. I'm sorry, I'll call him back and tell him it was a joke. I stared at her, this beautiful, complicated woman who just turned my quiet cruise into something resembling a soap opera. The smart thing would be to walk away, to tell her to clean up her own mess and leave me out of it. Instead, I heard myself saying, what would this fake engagement involve exactly? Hope flickered in her eyes. Just meeting him once, maybe. Letting him think we're serious so he'll back off for a while. I know it's a lot to ask, especially after yesterday. Yesterday. The kiss by the glacier, the dance in the ballroom, the way she'd felt in my arms like she belonged there. Maybe this was crazy, but everything about the past few days had been crazy. Good crazy. He's going to want details, I said slowly. How we met, how long we've been together, when we're planning the wedding. We can figure that out. Make up a story that sounds believable. And what happens after? When he realizes we're not actually getting married? Mia looked out at the ocean, her hair whipping in the wind. I don't know. Maybe by then I'll have figured out how to stand up to him for real. Or maybe what? She turned back to me, and I saw something vulnerable and hopeful in her expression that made my chest tight. Maybe by then it won't be fake anymore. The words hung between us like a challenge, a question, a promise. I thought about my empty house in Stockton, my quiet life treating other people's pets, the careful walls I'd built around my heart after Charles. Then I looked at Mia, really looked at her, and saw possibility staring back at me. Okay, I said. I'll do it. The relief on Mia's face was worth whatever complications lay ahead. We spent the rest of the day crafting our fictional love story, sitting in deck chairs with notebooks like we were planning a military operation instead of a romantic deception. So we met 6 months ago at a coffee shop, Mia said, scribbling notes. You were there with your dog. I was reading a book about elder care. We started talking about pets and how they help elderly patients. That's believable. What about the proposal? She blushed, which was adorable. Maybe you proposed during a sunset walk on the beach? Harold loves that romantic stuff, even though he'd never admit it. And the wedding? Spring next year. Gives us time to plan, and Harold can't complain about rushing into things. We rehearsed our story until it felt natural, adding little details that made it seem real. The way you supposedly always ordered my coffee just right. How I'd started volunteering at the care facility to spend more time with you. Small lies that felt dangerously close to things I actually wanted. That evening, we had dinner together in the main dining room, practicing our couple act for the other passengers. Mia reached across the table to touch my hand while telling a story, and the simple contact sent electricity up my arm. You're good at this, I murmured. Maybe because it doesn't feel like acting. After dinner, we walked the deck under a canopy of stars. The same stars we'd looked at that first night, but everything felt different now. Charged with possibility and the weight of our shared secret. Catherine, Mia said softly, stopping near the rail where we'd first really talked. I need you to know something. What? What I said to Harold about this maybe not being fake anymore. I meant it. My heart hammered against my ribs. Mia, I know it's crazy. I know we barely know each other. But I've never felt this way about anyone before, man or woman. You make me feel like I'm finally awake after years of sleepwalking. I stared into her blue eyes, seeing my own confusion and hope reflected there. I feel it too, this thing between us. I just don't know what to do with it. We don't have to figure it all out tonight, she said, stepping closer. But I need you to know that when I kiss you, it's not for practice. It's because I can't stop thinking about how you taste. She kissed me then, deeper than before, her hands tangling in my hair. I kissed her back with 15 years of suppressed longing, tasting coffee and wine and something uniquely her. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Come to my cabin, she whispered against my lips. I should have said no. Should have reminded her that we were supposed to be taking this slow, figuring things out. Instead, I nodded and let her lead me through the ship's corridors to her small room. The moment the door closed behind us, something shifted. The careful boundaries we'd maintained crumbled as she pressed me against the wall, her mouth finding mine again. I'd never been kissed like this by anyone, with such desperate hunger, such complete focus. "Are you sure?" she asked, her forehead resting against mine. "I've never been more sure of anything." What happened next was a revelation. Her hands exploring my body with reverent care, my own fingers discovering the softness of her skin, the way she whispered my name like a prayer, the taste of her neck, the feeling of finally being with someone who saw all of me and wanted more. We moved together with an urgency born of years of denial, of settling for less than we deserved. When she cried out my name, I felt something inside me break open and heal at the same time. Afterward, we lay tangled in her narrow bunk, the ship's gentle rocking lulling us toward sleep. Mia traced lazy patterns on my shoulder, her touch sending little aftershocks through my system. "No regrets?" she asked quietly. "None." I turned to face her, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. "You?" "Only that we waited this long." We talked until dawn, sharing stories we'd never told anyone else. About the loneliness of living other people's expectations, about dreams we'd buried under responsibility and fear, about the way we'd both felt like we were waiting for something without knowing what. "I used to think there was something wrong with me," Mia confessed as the first light crept through the porthole. "Every relationship with men felt like I was playing a role, pretending to be someone I wasn't." "I know exactly what you mean. With Charles, I kept waiting to feel that spark everyone talks about, that overwhelming attraction. I thought maybe I was broken." "We're not broken," she said firmly, kissing my forehead. "We were just looking in the wrong direction." As the ship sailed toward our final port, I realized that whatever happened when we got back to Stockton, whatever complications Harold might bring, this was worth it. Mia was worth it. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Reality hit us like a cold wave the moment we stepped off the ship in Seattle. The fantasy bubble we'd been living in for 7 days popped, leaving us standing on the dock with our luggage and a fake engagement story that suddenly felt very real and very complicated. "So this is it," Mia said, adjusting her backpack nervously. "Back to the real world. Are you having second thoughts about our arrangement?" She looked at me with those blue eyes that had become so familiar, so dear. "About the fake engagement? No. About what's happening between us. Terrified, but not having second thoughts." The drive back to Stockton felt like traveling between 2 different universes. We'd rented a car together, neither of us ready to separate just yet. Mia sat in the passenger seat, occasionally reaching over to touch my hand on the steering wheel, like she needed to reassure herself I was real. "Harold wants to meet you tomorrow night," she said, checking her phone for the 3rd time in an hour. "Dinner at his house?" "He's already planning the interrogation, I'm sure." "What's he like? Besides controlling and overbearing?" "He means well, in his own twisted way. After our parents died in that car accident 10 years ago, he appointed himself my guardian angel. Problem is, his version of protection feels more like suffocation." We pulled into my driveway first, and I felt a pang of loss at the thought of her leaving. Max greeted us at the door with his usual enthusiasm, immediately taking to Mia like they'd been friends forever. "He likes you," I said, watching her scratch behind his ears. "Animals always know," she replied with a smile that made my chest tight. That evening we had dinner at my kitchen table, the domesticity of it both thrilling and terrifying. Mia helped me cook pasta, moving around my kitchen like she belonged there. Every casual touch, every shared laugh, felt like we were building something real beneath the foundation of our lie. "I keep expecting to wake up," she said over wine. "This whole thing feels too good to be true. The fake engagement or us? Us. Definitely us." The next evening came too soon. Harold's house was exactly what I'd expected, pristine, expensive, and cold as a museum. He answered the door himself, a tall man with Mia's blonde hair and calculating gray eyes that sized me up immediately. "You must be Catherine," he said, extending a firm handshake. "Harold Mitchell. I've heard so much about you. All good things, I hope. We'll see." Dinner was an elaborate affair that felt more like a business negotiation than a family meal. Harold peppered me with questions about my practice, my background, my intentions toward his sister. I answered carefully, sticking to our rehearsed story while trying to project the confidence of a woman genuinely in love. "So you proposed after only 6 months?" Harold asked, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "When you know," I replied, reaching for Mia's hand across the table. The touch was supposed to be for show, but the way she squeezed back felt entirely real. "And the wedding?" "Spring," Mia said quickly, We want something small, intimate. Just close family and friends. Harold's eyes narrowed slightly. Interesting. Mia's never mentioned you before this cruise, not once in all our conversations. I felt Mia tense beside me. I wanted to be sure before I said anything, she said. You know how you worry about my choices. Because your choices have historically been questionable at best. The criticism hit its mark. I watched Mia shrink slightly, and something protective flared in my chest. Mia's choices brought her to me, I said firmly. I'd say her judgment is excellent. Harold studied me with new interest. You're very defensive of her. I love her. Of course I'm defensive. The words came out with more conviction than I'd intended, and I realized with a shock that they were true. Somewhere between the stargazing and the fake engagement and the night in her cabin, I'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love with Mia Mitchell. The realization must have shown on my face because Mia's eyes widened slightly, her grip on my hand tightening. We made it through the rest of dinner somehow, Harold's suspicion gradually giving way to grudging acceptance. As we prepared to leave, he pulled me aside. She's been hurt before, he said quietly, by people who promised things they couldn't deliver. If you're not serious about this, walk away now. I'm serious, I said, meaning it more than he could possibly know. The drive back to my house was quiet, both of us processing what had just happened. Inside, with Max curled up on his bed and the familiar comfort of home around us, Mia finally spoke. You meant it, didn't you? When you said you loved me. Yeah, I did. I do. She kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise. I love you too, Catherine. I think I have since that first night under the stars. We were still kissing when my doorbell rang. I pulled away reluctantly, checking the peephole to see a familiar figure that made my blood run cold. Charles stood on my porch, holding a bouquet of roses and wearing the same hopeful expression he'd worn when we were dating 20 years ago. Shit, I whispered. Who is it? Mia asked. My ex-husband. And he looks like he wants to reconcile. I considered not answering the door, but Charles had already seen my car in the driveway. Mia squeezed my hand reassuringly before I opened it, her presence giving me strength I didn't know I needed. Catherine. Charles smiled that practiced smile I'd fallen for 20 years ago. You look wonderful. The cruise did you good. What are you doing here, Charles? I brought these for you. He held out the roses like a peace offering. I've been doing a lot of thinking since the divorce was finalized. I made mistakes, Kate, big ones. But I want to fix this. Behind me, I felt Mia stiffen. Charles's eyes moved past me to take in the blonde woman standing in my living room, and his expression shifted from hopeful to confused. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you had company. Charles, this is Mia, my fiancée. The words came out steady and sure, and I realized I wasn't just playing a role anymore. The roses in Charles's hands drooped slightly as he processed what I'd said. Fiancé? He looked between us, his lawyer brain trying to make sense of the situation. Catherine, what's going on here? You've been divorced for less than a month. I've been divorced from you for less than a month, I corrected. But I've been free to find real love for the first time in 15 years. Mia stepped up beside me, her hand finding mine with natural ease. Nice to meet you, Charles. Catherine's told me so much about you. The polite words carried an edge that made Charles's jaw tighten. He'd always hated being outmaneuvered, and right now he was clearly struggling to regain control of a conversation that had slipped away from him. Catherine, can we talk privately? This is obviously some kind of rebound situation, and I think you're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was staying married to you for 15 years, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Mia isn't a rebound, Charles. She's the person I should have been looking for all along. You're not gay, Catherine. You can't just decide to be gay because our marriage didn't work out. The assumption in his voice, the casual dismissal of everything I'd discovered about myself, ignited something fierce in my chest. You're right, I can't decide to be gay. Just like I couldn't decide to be straight when I was married to you, but I can decide to finally be honest about who I am. Mia's thumb stroked across my knuckles, a small gesture of support that meant everything. Charles set the roses on my porch railing, his expression hardening. This is ridiculous, Kate. We had 15 good years together. We can work through our problems. This woman is just a distraction. Her name is Mia, I said sharply. And those weren't 15 good years, Charles. They were 15 years of me trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to feel something I couldn't force. I was suffocating in that marriage, and you were too wrapped up in your own world to notice. So you're throwing away everything we built for some cruise ship fling? I'm choosing happiness for the first time in my adult life. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of unspoken truths. Charles looked older somehow, deflated by the realization that his grand romantic gesture had failed spectacularly. I should go, he said finally. But Catherine, when this doesn't work out, when you realize what you're giving up, don't come crying to me. I won't, I said quietly. Because it will work out. After he left, Mia and I stood in my living room, the weight of what had just happened settling between us. I'd just publicly claimed her as my fiancée, defended our relationship to my ex-husband, and declared my love in front of someone who'd known me for 20 years. You were amazing, Mia said softly. The way you stood up to him, the way you protected us. I meant every word. I pulled her into my arms, needing to feel her solid warmth against me. I love you, Mia. Not because of some fake engagement or rebound situation. I love you because you make me feel alive. She kissed me then, deep and desperate, pouring all her own fears and hopes into the contact. We stumbled toward my bedroom, hands fumbling with buttons and zippers, desperate to reconnect after the confrontation with Charles. What followed was different from our night on the ship. Less desperate, more reverent. We took our time exploring each other, learning the geography of desire and love combined. When she whispered my name against my throat, when I felt her body respond to my touch, I knew with absolute certainty that this was where I belonged. Later, as we lay tangled in my sheets with Max snoring softly in the corner, Mia traced patterns on my bare shoulder. Harold's going to figure it out eventually, she said quietly. That this started as a lie. Maybe. But it's not a lie anymore, is it? No. It's the most real thing I've ever felt. Then we'll deal with Harold when the time comes, together. She lifted her head to look at me, her blue eyes serious in the dim light. Are you sure about this, Catherine? About us? Because once we cross this line completely, once we stop pretending this is temporary, there's no going back. I thought about Charles on my doorstep with his roses and assumptions. About Harold's controlling expectations. About the life I'd been living before the cruise, safe and small and suffocating. I've never been more sure of anything, I said, meaning it completely. I love you, Mia Mitchell. Fake engagement or not, I want to build something real with you. Even if it's complicated? Especially because it's complicated. The best things usually are. 3 weeks later, Harold showed up at my clinic unannounced. I was in the middle of treating a nervous tabby when Sarah knocked on the examination room door. Dr. Evans? There's a man here to see you. Says he's Mia's brother. My stomach dropped. Harold's gray eyes were cold when I met him in the waiting room, and he held a manila folder that looked ominous. We need to talk, he said without preamble. Privately. I led him to my office, my mind racing through possible explanations for his visit. He sat across from my desk and opened the folder, revealing what looked like a private investigator's report. Interesting reading, he said, sliding a photograph across the desk. This is you signing divorce papers 3 weeks before the cruise. The same cruise where you supposedly rekindled your 6-month romance with my sister. My mouth went dry. Harold, I can explain. Can you? Because according to this report, you and Mia had never met before that ship. The coffee shop story, the months of correspondence, all of it was lies. I stared at the photograph, seeing my own signature on the divorce papers, the date stamp that proved our deception. You hired a private investigator to spy on your own sister? I hired someone to protect her from gold diggers and con artists, which apparently is exactly what you are. That's not true. I love Mia. Love? Harold laughed bitterly. You've known her for less than a month. This whole engagement is a sham, isn't it? Some kind of scheme to get money or attention or whatever it is people like you want. People like me? Desperate divorcees looking for their next meal ticket. The accusation hit like a slap. I stood up, anger flaring in my chest. You don't know anything about what's between Mia and me. I know it started with a lie. I know you convinced my sister to deceive her own family. And I know that when she finds out the truth about your divorce timeline, about how you manipulated her into this fake relationship, she's going to be devastated. It's not fake anymore. What we have is real. Built on a foundation of lies. How long do you think that will last? Before I could answer, the door to my office opened, and Mia walked in. Her face bright with the smile she always wore when she saw me. The smile faded when she took in the tension in the room. The investigator's report spread across my desk. Harold? What are you doing here? Saving you from making the biggest mistake of your life. He gestured to the papers. Your fiancé has been lying to you, Mia, about everything. Mia's eyes moved from Harold to me to the photographs on the desk. I watched her face change as she processed what she was seeing, the timeline that exposed our deception. You were still married when we met, she said quietly. The divorce wasn't final until after the cruise. Mia, let me explain. You lied to me. About being divorced, about being ready for a new relationship. Everything you told me was a lie. Not everything. My feelings for you, what we have together, that's all real. How can I believe that when you've been lying from the beginning? Harold stood up, satisfaction written across his face. I think we're done here. Mia, let's go home. No. Mia's voice was stronger than I expected. Harold, get out! What? I said, get out. I'll deal with this myself. Harold looked between us, clearly not expecting this response. Mia, she's been manipulating you. And you've been manipulating me my entire adult life. At least Catherine's lies were born from fear, not control. Get out, Harold, now. After he left, the silence in my office was deafening. Mia sat in the chair Harold had vacated, staring at the investigator's report like it might reveal some hidden truth. I should have told you, I said finally, about the timeline, about how recent the divorce was. I was scared you'd think I was rebounding, that what we had wasn't real. Wasn't it? A rebound? No. God, no. Mia, meeting you was like waking up from a 15-year coma. You didn't make me realize I was gay, you made me realize I was alive. She looked up at me then, tears in her blue eyes. But you still lied. Even after we became real, even after we said we loved each other, you kept lying. I was terrified of losing you. And now you might lose me anyway. The words hung between us like a death sentence. I wanted to reach for her, to hold her until she understood that everything I'd done was born from love, not deception. But the distance between us felt insurmountable. What do we do now? I asked. Mia wiped her eyes and stood up. I need time to think, to figure out what's real and what isn't. Mia, please. Don't let Harold win. Don't let his manipulation destroy what we've built. You destroyed it the moment you chose lies over trust. She walked toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Catherine, I believe you love me. I just don't know if that's enough anymore. After she left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the evidence of our deception scattered across my desk. Outside, Max whined softly, sensing my distress. I'd found the love of my life and lost her in the same moment, undone by the very lies that had brought us together. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to protect what we had, I destroyed it completely,